Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take really complex source material. Sometimes it's dense legal documents, other times it's, obscure academic papers, and we cut right through to the core insights for you.
Right. The goal is to turn a huge stack of information into something clear, something you can really hold on to.
And today, that stack of material is, it's just remarkable. We're diving into the case of Dr. Qin Jingwan. He's a Chinese citizen, has a PhD in physics, and he's an expert in nonlinear complex systems.
And the sources we have are pretty unique. On one hand, you've got the official court rulings against him, the first and second instance.
The official story.
Exactly. But then we have his defense. A nearly 20,000-word document he wrote while he was in prison. He called it the blood letter.
So let's set the stage. What was he actually convicted of?
He was convicted of a crime called picking quarrels and provoking trouble. It's a very broad charge, often used for online speech. He was sentenced to a year and 8 months for things he posted on Twitter.
And the charge was that he was spreading false remarks.
Right. Remarks that the state said were insulting the political system and leadership, and that this supposedly seriously disrupted social order.
So the mission for this deep dive is to see how a trained scientist uses his own tools, we're talking complexity theory, physics, philosophy, to just completely dismantle the legal case against him.
It's more than a legal defense. It's really a critique of how the system defines reason itself. We're going to walk you through his argument, step by step.
Okay, let's start on the legal battlefield then. This crime, picking quarrels, especially online, it needs three things to stick, right?
That's right. The prosecution has to prove, 1, that you're spreading virtual information, basically rumors. 2, what they call mingzi, which means you knew it was false.
Knowing intent.
Knowing intent. And 3, and this is crucial, that it caused serious public disorder. Dr. Chen just took all 3 of those pillars and knocked them down, one by one.
So let's take the first one, falseness. How do you argue that what you said wasn't a rumor?
He did something brilliant. He actually created a classification system for his own tweets. He sorted them into 4 categories.
Okay, wait, where are they?
Art and symbolic expressions, subjective emotions, theoretical or academic views, and finally, objective descriptions.
And that classification is the key, isn't it?
It's everything. Because he argued that most of his posts fell into those first 3 categories: metaphors, opinions, academic ideas. And his point was simple. The law can only punish the fabrication of facts.
Right. You can't legally prove a poem is false.
You can't. He actually used this amazing analogy. He said, convicting him for a satirical post is like convicting the ancient poet Li Bai for writing that his hair was 3,000 zhang long.
Which is, what, hundreds of miles?
Exactly. It's obviously a metaphor. It's symbolic. You don't take the poet to court for spreading rumors about human hair. He argued his post deserved that same intellectual respect.
So he's drawing a hard line between fact and opinion, or fact and art. But how did the court handle that? Because it seems like they could just say his opinions were harmful.
Well, that's what they tried to do. And since they couldn't really pinpoint a specific fact he fabricated, they fell back on his identity. Which brings us to the second element, mingzi, or knowing intent.
This is where his PhD becomes a weapon used against him.
It's just astounding, really. The court literally stated that because he has a very high level of education, he should be able to distinguish right from wrong.
So he's highly educated, therefore he knew his posts were harmful.
That's the logic. Dr. Chen called it identity-based inference. It's guilt by qualification, not evidence of actual intent.
Instead of proving he acted with malice, they just pointed at his resume.
Yes, and he turned that right back on them. He said, look, as a scholar, my entire job is based on skepticism, on questioning things. He even cited Gödel's incompleteness theorems.
About the limits of logic.
Right. To say that as a scientist, he simply could not possess the absolute certainty required for the legal standard of knowing intent. He then made the ironic point that, by the court's logic, high academic qualifications equal crime evidence.
It's an incredible counterargument. He's saying the very mindset of a scientist's skepticism is being criminalized. So that leaves the third element. The big one, serious public disorder.
And this is where the scientist in him really comes out with the hard data. The court just stated that the harm occurred, but Dr. Chen had the facts.
What were they?
He pointed out that his social media account had fewer than 100 followers.
100, that's it.
That's it. And the engagement, retweets, comments was basically 0. He said the prosecution offered absolutely no evidence of actual chaos, no panic, no disruption, nothing.
But the killer blow, the most damning piece of evidence,
Was that after he was released, he went and checked. The exact posts that were cited by the court as evidence of chaos were still online.
Still there.
Still there, totally unnoticed, which empirically proved that the serious public disorder was, as he put it, a fictional construct, a legal fiction.
Okay, so he dismantles the legal case. But then he goes a step further. This is where it gets really mind-bending. He doesn't just say they failed to prove harm. He says they fundamentally misunderstand what causes harm in the first place.
Exactly. He drags the court into his home turf, complex systems and physics. He uses his expertise to just completely disassemble their concept of causality.
And he uses this idea of self-organized criticality, SOC theory.
Right, and avalanche dynamics. Let's use the sandpile analogy he talks about. It makes it really clear.
Okay, walk us through it.
Imagine you're dropping grains of sand one by one onto a table. A pile forms. It gets bigger, steeper, and eventually it reaches what physicists call a critical state. It's unstable.
Ready to collapse.
Exactly, and at that point, the very next grain of sand you drop could do almost nothing. Or it could trigger a massive system-wide avalanche.
Okay, I'm with you.
So the key scientific insight is this. If that avalanche happens, what caused it? Was it that last single grain of sand?
No, it was the fact that the whole pile was unstable to begin with.
Precisely. The cause isn't the tiny grain, it's the system's internal critical state. So Dr. Chen applied this directly to the charge of causing chaos. He argued that society, or the internet, is the sand pile.
And his retweet was the single grain of sand.
A tiny one with almost no followers. He argued that if the system really did experience serious chaos, it was because the system itself was already in a fragile, critical state. His action was, mathematically and scientifically, an insufficient condition to cause a system-wide collapse.
So he's saying you can't blame me for the avalanche. You have to look at why your sand pile was so unstable.
He scientifically negated criminal causality. It's just a masterful application of his field to his own freedom.
And he didn't stop with physics. He moved into the philosophy of how systems work, right?
Yeah, he started citing systems theorists like Luhmann and Bertalanffy. He argued that the judicial and political system dealing with his case had become a closed system.
What does that mean, a closed system?
Well, a healthy system is an open one. It takes in feedback from the outside world, criticism, new data, dissent, and it uses that to learn and self-correct.
Okay.
A closed system, he argued, is one that rejects that feedback. It seals itself off from reality to protect its own internal stability. In this case, prioritizing political stability over, facts.
And what happens to a closed system over time?
Entropy increases. It's a concept from thermodynamics. Basically, the system stops learning. It becomes rigid, detached from the real world, and it drives itself toward failure. He called it entropy death.
And he argued the court's response was making things worse, not better.
Exactly. He called the response, using punishment to silence intellectual critique, a positive feedback loop.
Which amplifies the problem.
Right. The state wants stability, but the punishment only creates more distrust. He literally wrote, the more suppression, the more distrust. It actively destabilizes the very society it claims to be protecting.
Let's talk about maybe the sharpest philosophical tool he used, which comes from the philosopher of science, Karl Popper.
This is where he attacks the very logic of the court. He argued their main claim, that his posts cause chaos, was a pseudo-statement. And this all comes down to Popper's idea of falsifiability.
Can you break down falsifiability for us?
Sure. It's the bedrock of all science. It just means that for any claim to be considered rational or scientific, there has to be some conceivable way to prove it wrong.
So if I claim all swans are white, I can test that by looking for a black swan.
You can, but if you make a claim that can't be tested, that no evidence could ever contradict, then you're not dealing with reason anymore. You're dealing with dogma.
And Dr. Chen accused the court of operating on dogma.
That's the charge. He said the court refused to provide any empirical evidence of chaos. They refused to engage with his logical defense. And crucially, they refused to admit that their judgment could be tested, falsified, by the actual facts, like his tiny follower count.
So by doing that, they stepped outside the realm of rational argument.
Yes. He said the whole process became a degenerating research program, to borrow a phrase from another philosopher, Lakatos. It wasn't about finding truth anymore.
This completely reframes the whole situation. It's not about whether he tweeted something. It's about whether the court itself was acting rationally.
That was his entire strategy. He escalated the fight from a small criminal case to a battle over epistemology and the nature of a rational civilization.
So beyond the philosophical arguments, his blood letter also details some really serious failures in the legal process itself.
Absolutely. The procedural violations he lists are, if true, a fundamental breakdown of fairness. For one, his first trial was held entirely in secret.
Not public.
Not public, even though the case had nothing to do with state secrets. That alone is a major violation of the right to a public trial.
And what about his appeal? When he presented all this incredibly detailed scientific defense.
The second instance, the appeals court upheld the verdict without even holding an open hearing.
So he never got to present these arguments in person.
No, he was denied that chance. And his letter goes further. It makes these incredibly serious claims of obstruction of his defense, of evidence being ignored, and even coercion during interrogation, like being denied food and sleep.
Those are extremely serious accusations that go to the heart of due process.
They absolutely do. And there's one procedural flaw in the appeal ruling that is just glaring. It's about the burden of proof.
Okay, for everyone listening, the burden of proof is foundational. The state has to prove you're guilty.
Right. Innocent until proven guilty. But Dr. Chen points out that the appeals court ruling said that he failed to submit new evidence to support his appeal.
Wait a minute. Why is it on him, the defendant, to submit new evidence?
That's the violation. He argues that by saying that, the court illegally shifted the burden of proof onto him. It flipped the presumption of innocence on its head.
And all of this, he argues, goes against both the Chinese Constitution and international rights agreements.
Yes. He says convicting someone for subjective speech violates the Constitution's guarantee of freedom of expression. And the secret trials, the disproportionate punishment for an act with no proven harm, that all flies in the face of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights.
He even turns the government's own slogans back on them.
He does. He accuses the authorities of undermining state policies, like the rule of law, by suppressing the very academic discussion and international exchange that those policies are supposed to encourage.
So after this incredible deep dive, what does this all mean? It feels like more than just one person's legal case.
It is. It's this profound clash between the rigor of science and the assertion of law. What's so powerful is how he successfully reframed his case. It's not a minor crime. It's a critique of a system's rationality.
His blood letter really becomes this landmark document of intellectual resistance.
It really does. It combines the force of someone willing to stand for their principles with the cold, hard precision of a physicist. He didn't just argue about politics. He argued that the method used against him was irrational.
He called it a diminished dimensionality distortion.
Yeah, a fancy way of saying they took a complex reality, how ideas spread, how society works, and flattened it into a simplistic, false, linear model to get the result they wanted.
It's a challenge to all of us, really, to demand a higher standard of reason, especially from institutions of power.
And that leads to the final provocative thought he leaves us with. Citing Popper, he argued that when any system, a judicial system, a political system, even a scientific theory punishes skepticism, when it refuses to allow its own claims to be tested and questioned, it ceases to be a rational system.
And if a complex system punishes the very mechanisms of feedback and self-correction.
What guarantees its long-term stability? What prevents its inevitable decay? That's the question his entire defense forces us to confront.